Hello, Nafisa Latic. Thank you so much for taking part in our TRT World Research Centre interview.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me, Mamoon, and I'm glad that you called me, and I'm glad I'm participating in this important topic for me personally and professionally.
Thank you. As we mark the 25th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre, you as a Bosnian, as well as a journalist, how do you see the international media coverage in general, and I mean specifically? Is it fair? Is it accurate? I know, like earlier on, there was a shock that how could this happen in Europe, out of all places? But like after 25 years, do you think the shock is still there, and have the lessons been learned?
Well, have the lessons been learned? I'm not so sure, but let me start with the coverage of the international media first. When we look at the international media in general, I would say their coverage about Srebrenica has been mostly accurate because most of the international channels are following international courts, their verdicts, their numbers. I worked at a couple of international channels, and I know for sure that this is mostly done properly and accurate. The thing with the coverage that I see as a problem is I don't think it's sufficient. I think the most of the international channels focus on Srebrenica only on the 11th of July. That's the day of the commemoration. That's the day when every year Bosnians bury the remains of those killed in July 1995, the ones who are identified, the ones that are found until then, and whose families allow them to bury. So when it comes to this, I think it's not sufficient. I think there are still many things connected to this very important story for every channel, I think, especially the channels in Europe and internationally, that needs to be covered throughout the year. The things that happened in Srebrenica that are defined as a genocide by the International Court for Justice and in the verdicts that we have for Ratko Mladic and Slobodan Milosevic, those are events that are produced by dangerous ideologies that are still very much alive in Bosnia. This is why I say it's not sufficient to cover Srebrenica only on the 11th of July. Throughout the year, we still are trying to find remains of the bodies. 25 years on, we still need information about where are these bodies buried, not just in Eastern Bosnia and other parts of Bosnia. And for this, we need international support. We need international audience to understand how difficult it is to live 25 years on and still having this part of our history very much opened and so much alive. So often I hear when we cover this story, oh, Nafisa, but it's been so many years. I say, yes, it's been from the event itself, but the ideologies that produced this on the European soil, on the continent that survived Holocaust, that allowed this to happen again in Srebrenica in 1995. So I would say the journalists in general need to pay attention to Bosnia and what's happening, and not just in Bosnia, but throughout the Europe. I would say the coverage of the rise of racism, of populism, of Islamophobia, this is all very much alive, and this is something that we do need to pay attention to if we don't want to allow that something like genocide in Srebrenica happens again.
Right. I mean, you touched on ideology, and as you mentioned, the issues when the international community said never again, in a reference that there's a will not to allow massacres like mass massacres like the Holocaust and other abuse or atrocities against minorities, and yet they did allow it to happen. It did happen in Europe. The fear is you feel that I think nationally, regionally, and across Europe, there's also a lot of people who are denying that a genocide took place, or trying to reduce what
Exactly.
happened, and there's a revisionism of history. And
Exactly. And this is the dangerous part of this story. The fact that 25 years on, we still have people who are denying, despite all the verdicts, despite of all the bodies, despite of all those Srebrenica mothers who are crying every single day, every single year, trying to find sons, husbands, daughters. This is the crucial part. The denial of the genocide is stopping Bosnia of any kind of progress. Currently in Bosnia, you have even in the government on the Serbian side, people who are using every opportunity to deny a genocide. And these are the people who are still winning the votes every 4 years in Bosnia. These are the people who still believe Ratko Mladic is a national hero. That's the Serbian commander who entered Srebrenica with his forces and massacred 11,000 Bosnian Muslim men and teenage boys. So this is something that's stopping Bosnia of moving forward. And this is where the international community needs to step in and help Bosnia in its process towards its reconciliation by calling on those who are denying genocide, calling on remembering, trying to every single time throughout the media or through their policies to go back and one more time tell to the Serbian leaders, especially in Bosnia, that these are the verdicts done by the international courts and not the courts done in Bosnia. So it's very dangerous. The denial of the genocide is something that, unfortunately, my country still has to live with. So can you imagine, Mamoon, you have on one side people who are trying to find parts of their father's bodies, and they find it in 3 different places throughout Bosnia, and they don't know where else they could look for. And you have a Serbian side who think this is all exaggeration. I'm not saying everyone in Serbia, but those a lot of Bosnian Serbs still believe that this was all exaggeration, that Ratko Mladic is a national hero, that everything that took place in Srebrenica is not the way it's portrayed in media, and they are denying international courts. They are denying 11th of July completely and ignoring, the pain and the sufferings of those people. So this is the most dangerous part. As I said, this is something that there is no, when someone asks me, has the justice been served? It's very difficult to say that justice has been served when you still have people who were part of that army who entered Srebrenica walking freely, working freely in Bosnia, when you still have deniers of the genocide in power in Bosnia, deciding on the future of Bosnia. So no, justice has not been served. It's just been it's been only served in terms of the verdict and the things that have been done when it comes to Slobodan Milošević and Ratko Mladic, who is currently in prison, appealing to the verdict, who is convicted of genocide in Srebrenica. So it's very difficult to move forward even 25 years on, and how to, what is the solution for this? That's like the obvious question. It's very hard to find it only in Bosnia. So there needs to be, in some way, some kind of European policy, international power to kind of make sure that the history and the facts are out there and that everyone needs to accept it. So this is the most difficult part of this story when it comes to me personally and me professionally. It was always, for me, the most difficult thing is to comprehend this role of international community in 1995 in Srebrenica, especially having in mind that the UN peacekeepers were on the ground, that we had Dutch battalion protecting the so-called safe zone. And all this, how can I even believe that, something will change in the future when, in 1995, when you had NATO, when you had EU, when you had, all these organizations already formed, that 11,000 people just disappear in a couple of days in one summer in 1995. Yes, there has been a lot of, going back in Europe after Srebrenica, and there's been a lot of security policies implemented in Europe and in NATO after, and in United Nations after Srebrenica happened. But I'm not sure it was ever fully explained how was this allowed on the European soil. So this
Well,
remains to be one of the most complicated parts of this story.
it looks like, from listening to you, it looks like the story is not over. I mean, when we talk about what happened 25 years ago, the idea is, what did we learn? What went wrong? It was a terrible thing, etc., etc. People like analysts are saying how to avoid something similar elsewhere in another country, as if it's something to avoid, but as if it's something that ended. But listening to you, it sounds like it's a problem that hasn't ended on two
Very
fronts.
much. Yeah, it's
The,
still
the, the denial front means it could happen again, especially regionally, as well as the whole environment of far right. That's increasing. That's threatening that these things could happen again. And also, it seems that a lot of issues haven't been resolved. So when you mention people that haven't been punished, now I understand that sometimes you can't punish everybody, but there are models like South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation, where you apologize, you admit what you did
right.
wrong, and then the
Exactly.
other side
We
forgives.
never had that. No, in Bosnia, we never had a proper apology from the Bosnian Serb side. And this story, as you just said, no, it actually never ended for Bosnia. Why? I mean, couple of things. How can it end when every couple of months you have people in from the Bosnian Serbs side organizing events, chanting the same sentences chanted by Ratko Mladic that summer in Srebrenica. This is the dangerous rhetoric still existing in my country that, for some reason, just continues. I mean, what do we have? This happens. We have, Bosniak and Croat side condemn this, but it's just keep repeating. This means that the young generations of Bosnian Serbs are listening to this rhetoric, this dangerous narrative that started in the 90s and even before with the ideology of Great Serbia, that through years ended up in genocide. This is why the rhetoric is so important. This is why I'm scared when I hear that the mosques in Germany have been burned. This is why I'm scared when I hear in Europe that in some parts Muslims are afraid to go out because people will think they are terrorists. That is a dangerous rhetoric coming back, not just in Europe, but now in the countries. If you look at Germany, if you look at Austria, if you look at Italy, these are the countries that currently are facing a significant rise in populism. And this is dangerous. So how can, for us in Bosnia, when we hear this, people who survive this, it's just, you cannot even comprehend how it's dangerous for us. I'm not saying another genocide will happen tomorrow, but this means that regardless of what happened in 1995, regardless of all those bodies still left buried somewhere in Bosnian mountains, regardless of 8,000 people being buried currently at the memorial center in Potocari, we are still hearing the same narrative. The history is history. The facts are facts. In South Africa, people apologized, people accepted what happened, and people moved forward. We don't see that in Bosnia. We see from almost every side constantly going back to past. Bosnians have to go back to past because they did not bury their loved ones still. And we have a now problem. Survivors are getting older. Srebrenica mothers are getting older. dying without finding their children. So it's very much alive, especially if you go to some parts in eastern Bosnia where you can, like in Srebrenica, you don't, Bosnian Muslim men are gone. It's a sad city. It has a problem with many other issues, not just it's barely surviving. So it's very much alive, and the consequences are still being felt. And I'm not sure that having in mind all this populist rhetoric lately in Europe, Europe itself knows how to deal with this narrative, and this is the dangerous part.
So if Europe hasn't found the solution itself, you have less hope in Bosnia coming to resolving this issue. But what would you hope or suggest, or at least what do you think? What role could the media do to help moving forward? Because we know that people are raised with a certain ideology, with a certain denial. What can be done to reverse that, to stop that, to change that? Something positive to do.
Well, I think especially for journalists, I think it's crucial for all of them to visit Memorial Center in Srebrenica if they want to know more about the events that took place. A lot of my colleagues went, and after they went, they said this completely changed their perspective and the way they've seen Srebrenica until now. They've been aware of the scale of the atrocities that took place, but when they went there, they were left speechless. For Bosnian journalists, and this is honestly one of the reasons I've become journalist, it's crucial to tell our stories, to tell what we witnessed so far. In my early 20s, I witnessed the identification process in one small city near Sarajevo. That's the city where we usually identify the bodies, and then we send them to Memorial Center. I arrived and I witnessed an older man identifying his son based on a size of bone of my finger, of my finger. And he was looking into that, and this is how he had to identify his son. This is all they could find. That it was like 20 years then when I went. So for me personally, I think it's crucial to share these kind of stories, to especially to write in English, to do a lot of research in English, to try to, because what I've noticed is that people are slowly, especially in media, they're slowly starting to see Srebrenica as an anniversary, and that's it. I still think Srebrenica deserves more in-depth analysis. And I think what media can do, especially now, I think it's crucial 25 years on, having in mind everything that's happening now in the US and in Europe, to go back to Srebrenica in 1995, to go back a couple of years earlier, to see what led to that, how dangerous certain rhetorics can be, how strange ideologies can end up in these monstrous crimes, how yes, I think this is something that journalists needs to focus on and try to analyze more, not just cover it as an event that took place every single year on the 11th of July. So I think this is something that and also one other thing is that to try to get as many voices as possible of those who witnessed those events. They're still alive. I have a couple of colleagues who survived 11th of July, who are now in their mid-40s, to try to talk to them, to try to understand the role of international community, and to ask, to search for solutions for these kind of ideologies in the future, because I think this is the only way, for Srebrenica not to be forgotten. I mean, in my country, it will never be forgotten, but it's crucial also to have this support from international media and international factors.
And hopefully this, once there's attention raised internationally, then that would translate into pressure on your country, so that they would come to this realization too, and be more responsible with their media. I mean, this is at the end of the day, this is where also it matters. In Bosnia, it matters all regionally as well, in the immediate neighboring countries where there's still a threat. Right.
Exactly. It's important to say things as they are. It's important to have one narrative about what happened in Srebrenica. It's important to, for international media especially, it's important to try to look at the rising Islamophobia in Europe, to see to try to look deeper into the events that are taking place lately in Europe, and to use Srebrenica an example how things can go wrong. So the divisions, unfortunately, remain in Bosnia, but the media in Bosnia is also, especially the local media, is very much divided, between those who are following one narrative and the ones who are following, Bosnian Serb leadership. So this is also a very dangerous part. We had the same event in Bosnia covered on local TV channels in a very different way. So this is where international media can step in and say, okay, we've sent an investigative journalist. This is what we found. We interviewed these people. We talked to people who were in The Hague during the prosecution process. They can follow up the appeals that Ratko Mladic is now continues to pursue. So this is something that international media needs to do. And I think the main thing is, human stories. There are so many human stories in Bosnia unheard. Visiting the identification centers, talking to people in Srebrenica, how do they feel at this moment? Are they moving forward? Unfortunately, at this moment, you will hear many negative responses. But the only way for Bosnia moving forward is to have this one narrative and one same factual history, to have an apology, to have people saying, okay, this is what happened. We will never forget, but we accept it. We apologize, and let's move forward to make this country and the region itself. It's not just the country; it's the whole region is connected to these events, and they can spill through the Bosnian borders. So this is something that's crucial. International community can do more, should do more. I'm trying to stay positive, but it's very difficult. If you go back to Eastern Bosnia, you wouldn't. I'm not sure you would be that positive. It's still very, very much alive, and the people are. It's difficult for them to move forward.
Thank you so much, Nafisa Latic, for your very informative contribution. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.